Right, so get ready because we're going there today. We're going to tackle this question that a listener sent in. And, well, it's a little spicy. Let's just say that.
It's definitely a question that I think a lot of people kind of whisper about, but they don't often talk about it openly and honestly.
Yeah, for sure. And to get like some real unfiltered perspectives, we're going to the source of all wisdom, right?
Oh, are we going to the library?
We're going to Reddit. Specifically, we found this thread on AskMenAdvice. And in this thread, this woman just straight up asked guys, like point blank, about what makes giving oral sex a good or bad experience for them.
It's like we're getting a window into the male psyche, you know? This is our chance to really understand, like, the desires, the anxieties, and maybe even some fantasies that guys don't often talk about.
Yeah. And before we jump in, I just want to make one thing super clear.
Hmm.
This isn't about like giving you a step-by-step guide, okay? Or telling you what you should or shouldn't do. We're just here to explore, the different opinions and experiences that came out of this thread because there's no one right way to approach this, right?
Yeah, and what I think is so fascinating about this particular thread is that it goes beyond just the physical mechanics, you know? Like it actually delves into the emotional and the psychological aspects of intimacy, which is really cool.
Totally. Okay, so let's get into it. One of the things that was so surprising to me was just how much emphasis there was on enthusiasm.
Hmm.
Like it wasn't even just about being good at it. It was about genuinely enjoying yourself.
You're totally right. Like I saw that over and over again in the thread, right? These men were emphasizing how important it was to feel like their partner was, actually into it and that they were enjoying the experience. It wasn't just about, him receiving pleasure. It was about sharing the pleasure, which is really interesting.
Yeah, there was this one quote that really stuck with me, and I'm going to quote it here, okay? Someone said, think of it as a blow hobby, not a blow job.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are we setting the bar high or what?
Well, it might sound a little tongue-in-cheek, but I actually think it highlights something really important. Men, in these moments, they want to feel desired. They want to feel appreciated and cared for. It's not just about the physical act itself. It's about feeling connected to their partner on like an emotional level.
Yeah, like they want to know that you're not just going through the motions. You're actually present and enjoying being there.
Exactly. And that sense of like genuine enthusiasm can be incredibly validating and arousing for men.
So we've established enthusiasm is king. But what about, like, the more technical aspects? Were there any specific techniques that the guys in the thread kept mentioning?
Yeah, actually, there was this one unexpected trend, and it was this focus on the frenulum.
Wait, hold on. Remind me. What's the frenulum again?
So it's that little band of tissue on the underside of the head of the penis. Several guys described it as being incredibly sensitive and, pleasurable when it's stimulated.
Okay, yeah, I remember that now. And actually, one guy even called it, like, magic. But then someone else jumped in and was like, well, actually, that area can lose sensitivity after circumcision. So I guess, like, what feels amazing for one person might not be the same for another. Huh?
Exactly. And this is why communication is so crucial in any sexual encounter, right? Because everyone's anatomy is different. What feels good for one person might not feel the same for someone else.
And that's a great point, because if you're listening to this and thinking, wow, this is way more complicated than I thought, you are not alone.
No, you're definitely not alone. And it really highlights that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to intimacy, right? It's about understanding your partner's individual preferences, being willing to experiment and try new things, and most importantly, communicating openly and honestly.
And speaking of honesty, some of these guys in this thread got really specific, like really specific about their likes and dislikes, down to the nitty-gritty details.
Oh, yeah. It can be fascinating to get that level of insight into what men are actually thinking and feeling, especially when it comes to something that's, often considered taboo.
Yeah, like they were holding nothing back.
Yeah.
So besides that whole frenulum thing, were there any other techniques that were, like, really popular?
Well, one thing that kept coming up was this importance of varying pressure and speed, which makes sense. Some guys liked it slow and gentle, while others preferred a more intense rhythmic approach.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you wouldn't eat a whole meal at the same pace.
Right.
You want to, like, savor the different flavors and textures.
That's a great analogy. And it really speaks to how important it is to be attentive and responsive to your partner's cues. Pay attention to their body language, their breathing, any sounds they might be making. It all helps you figure out what's working and what's not.
Totally. Okay, so far we've talked about enthusiasm, technique, communication. But this thread wasn't all serious business, right? There were some pretty hilarious anecdotes in there, too.
Oh, absolutely. It wouldn't be Reddit without a healthy dose of humor.
Like, remember that guy who said he dated this girl who called him a racial slur for 2 years? And he put up with it because, get this, because the oral sex was that good.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. That one definitely raised some eyebrows.
Right. And it sparked this whole debate about whether amazing sex could ever justify being in such a toxic relationship. Like, where do you stand on that?
I think it's a complex issue with no easy answers, but it definitely brings up some important questions about boundaries, self-respect, and the power dynamics that can exist within intimate relationships.
Right, right. It's a good reminder that even when things are getting hot and heavy, you shouldn't compromise your values or tolerate behavior that feels unacceptable no matter what.
I completely agree. Pleasure should never come at the expense of your dignity or your well-being.
And sometimes those boundaries are about seemingly small things, like hair. There was this whole side conversation in the thread about whether hair should be up or down during, the act. What do you think about that?
I find it fascinating how these tiny little details can become so important when you're talking about intimacy. I mean, they reflect personal preferences, right? But also maybe cultural norms, even personal aesthetics.
It's true. And some guys loved the hair down look. And then others were all about that ponytail practicality.
Yeah.
But then you had women chiming in saying they hated it when hair got in their face. Or, even worse, in their mouth. It's clearly a matter of personal preference, like so many things are.
Right. And again, it all comes back to communication, right? It's all about each partner feeling comfortable enough to express their preferences and then hopefully, finding some compromise that feels good and enjoyable for both of you.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here,
Yeah.
but it feels like we've only just scratched the surface of what this Reddit thread has to offer. What are some of the other insightful comments that went beyond just the techniques?
Well, I'm glad you asked because that's where things get really interesting.
All right, so we're back, and we're ready to dive even deeper into this Reddit thread where men are, like, spilling all the secrets about what they really think about receiving oral sex. And it seems like there's way more to it than just the technique, right?
Absolutely. We've talked about how important enthusiasm and communication are, but this thread actually reveals so much about the emotional and psychological layers of this, intimate act.
Okay, so tell me more. Like, what were some of the things that really jumped out at you?
Well, I noticed that a lot of men were talking about the power of eye contact and like other nonverbal cues. It wasn't just about the physical sensations. They were really craving that deeper connection with their partner.
So it's like, beyond just the pleasure itself, they want to feel seen by their partner, especially in such a vulnerable moment.
Yeah, exactly. And one guy even said that it felt like incredibly intimate and vulnerable, almost like he was witnessing his partner, let loose in a way that felt really trusting, which I thought was beautiful.
Ah, that is kind of beautiful. It really makes you think about how physical intimacy can actually be a pathway to a deeper emotional intimacy, doesn't it?
Oh, it absolutely can. It allows partners to see each other in a really raw and authentic way, which can strengthen their bond in ways that go beyond just the physical.
Okay, so we've got the enthusiasm, the connection, some killer techniques. But let's be real, not every guy was, like, totally into the whole oral sex thing. There were definitely a few who straight up said they preferred hand jobs.
And you know what? That's totally valid. This isn't about saying one thing is better than another. It's about recognizing and respecting that there are so many different preferences out there. What really matters is that both partners feel comfortable communicating their needs and finding what truly works for them?
It's all about finding what works for you. And one guy even said that he actually preferred giving oral sex to receiving it, which, you know what? That is a whole other deep dive waiting to happen.
Maybe we'll save that for another episode. But it definitely reminds us that sexuality is complex and it's multifaceted. There's no one right way to experience pleasure. And it's amazing that people are feeling more and more free to explore their desires and express their needs.
Speaking of desires and needs, some of the guys in the thread got pretty explicit about what they liked. Like deep throating, for example, came up quite a bit.
Ah, yes, deep throating.
Mm.
And while it can definitely be an intense and pleasurable experience for both partners, we really need to emphasize consent and communication here. It should never be expected or demanded from anyone.
Oh, definitely. And even if both partners are totally open to it, it's still so important to take things slowly and respect each other's limits straight.
Absolutely. Like gagging, for example, is a natural reflex. And it's
Yeah.
important not to shame someone for it. Instead, maybe adjust the technique or take a break if you need to.
And then there's the whole question of swallowing, which, like, seems to be a bit of a hot button issue for some people. What was the general consensus in the thread? Was there even a consensus?
Oh my gosh, it was all over the place. Some guys were really into it, others were like, whatever, and then there were those who absolutely hated it.
So yet again, it's another one of those different strokes for different folks situations, huh?
It seems that way. The important thing, though, is that both partners feel comfortable talking about it openly and honestly. And if one partner is not okay with swallowing, it's absolutely crucial to respect that boundary.
Absolutely. And, you know, this whole conversation is making me think we've been so focused on what men enjoy, but what about the women? Where are their voices in all of this?
That's a fantastic question. While this Reddit thread was specifically about male perspectives, we can't forget that pleasure is a two-way street.
Exactly. So for the final part of our deep dive, I think we should shift the focus a bit and explore the female perspective on this, often taboo topic. Okay, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. We've been exploring what men really think about receiving oral sex, and we've been, getting all these insights from that crazy Reddit thread. But as we were wrapping up part 2, we had this realization, like something was missing, right?
Yeah, it's easy to kind of get caught up in one side of the story, especially when the source material, like in this case, is so focused on the male experience. But, we can't forget that true intimacy, it's a two-way street. So understanding the woman's perspective, it's just as crucial.
Totally. It's not just about what feels good for the person on the receiving end. It's about creating an experience that's pleasurable and fulfilling for both partners.
Absolutely. And even though we don't have direct access to a bunch of female responses from that specific Reddit thread, we can still tap into, a wider understanding of female sexuality and what makes a positive experience, right?
Okay, so tell me more. Like, what can you tell us about what women generally enjoy when it comes to, this particular act?
Well, one of the key takeaways from research on female pleasure is that it's not just about the physical sensations. Just like the men in that Reddit thread, women also crave that emotional connection and validation during these intimate moments.
It's about more than just going through the motions, right? It's about being present, attentive, and genuinely engaged with your partner.
Exactly. Women want to feel desired. They want to feel appreciated and seen by their partner, and they want to know that their efforts are, noticed and reciprocated.
Which, of course, brings us right back to that theme of communication, right?
Yeah.
Always got to communicate.
Absolutely. Open and honest communication, it's crucial for any sexual experience, but it's even more important when it comes to, navigating the nuances of female pleasure. Women need to feel comfortable expressing their needs and their desires just as much as men do, if not more.
But that can be so tricky. There's often this fear of judgment, right? Or feeling like they're doing it wrong if they speak up.
It's so true. I mean, societal expectations, even past experiences, can make it really hard for women to feel comfortable voicing their desires openly. That's why it's so important to create a safe and judgment-free space where both partners feel good about sharing their needs and their fantasies.
So it's not just about what is being said, it's also about the atmosphere, right? Like creating an atmosphere of trust and mutual respect.
Exactly. And communication, it goes beyond just words, too, like paying attention to your partner's nonverbal cues, their body language, their breathing, the subtle sounds they make. All of that can give you really valuable insight into what's working and what's not.
It's almost like learning to speak a whole new language, right?
Mm-hmm.
One that's made up of these subtle gestures and unspoken desires.
I love that. It's so true. It's about tuning into those subtle signals and then responding to them in a way that makes your partner feel seen, heard, and understood.
That's deep. Okay, so we've talked about the emotional and communicative aspects of female pleasure. What about, like, the physical side of things? Are there any general insights about what women find physically pleasurable during, this specific act?
Of course. But, just like we saw in that Reddit thread, there's a whole spectrum of preferences. What feels good for one woman might not feel the same for another. So yeah, it's really all about exploration and communication.
Yeah, I'm sensing a theme here.
But speaking broadly, one area that often plays a really key role in female pleasure is the clitoris. It's the most sensitive part of female anatomy. And for many women, stimulating it directly or indirectly can be incredibly pleasurable.
Makes sense. So is it as simple as just, like, focusing on the clitoris then?
Well, not necessarily. Some women might prefer direct clitoral stimulation, while others might enjoy having the area around the clitoris teased or, indirectly stimulated. It really depends on the person.
And of course, let's not forget about all those other erogenous zones too, right?
Exactly. For a lot of women, areas like the breasts, the neck, the inner thighs, those can also be, incredibly sensitive, and they can definitely add a whole other dimension to the experience.
So basically, it sounds like the key takeaway here is that there's no one right way to approach this whole thing. It's about open communication, exploration, and discovering what feels good for both partners, which we've been saying this whole time.
Right.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Wow. Well, here we are at the end of our deep dive. We went from like Reddit confessions to these bigger insights about intimacy, communication, and the complexities of both male and female pleasure. What a ride.
It really has been, and I hope our listeners out there found it as enlightening and thought-provoking as we have.
Me too. And if this episode has sparked any thoughts or reflections for you, please, we would love to hear from you. Share your comments and insights over on Shauna's YouTube channel.
Yeah, you can find her channel by just searching Shauna Pelage on YouTube.
It's easy peasy. And while you're there, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the Voices of the Soul channel so you don't miss out on any future deep dives. You know, we're always exploring new and interesting topics, and we absolutely love hearing from you guys.
Until next time, happy exploring.